Welcome to Edwardian Sleep Stories. Before tonight's journey begins, let me know where you're listening from. Now, settle in. Let your shoulders soften. Let your breathing slow, and allow the day to drift quietly away. Tonight, we travel to Salisbury in January of 1907, to a small set of rooms above a music shop on the edge of the Cathedral Close, in the blue half-dark before dawn, where the frost has drawn ferns on the inside of the window, and the great spire stands out of the mist across the green, like something dreamed. Among them is Frances Hartley, a 46-year-old piano tuner, carrying one worn tuning lever in a leather roll, one set of felt mutes and rubber wedges, and a grief she has tuned around for 20 years without once resolving it. A career as a player she gave up, and a music she has not let herself make since. She expects only her winter rounds, the cold country houses, the neglected instruments, the long frosty roads between one parlor and the next. But at the last house on her circuit lives an old blind tuner named Silas Wren, who taught her father the trade 60 years ago, and who knows more than anyone living about the small necessary imperfections by which a whole instrument is made to sing. This is the story of Frances Hartley, and of 3 days on her winter rounds when a woman who had kept one thing perfect by letting all the rest go silent discovers that an instrument tuned too pure cannot play at all, and that the tempering of everything, a very little, is what lets the music through. So close your eyes, breathe gently, and let the frost and the far spire and the quiet keys carry you through cold air and lamplight and sleep. The rooms above the music shop were very cold in the hour before dawn, and Frances Hartley lay a moment longer than she needed to under the piled blankets, listening. That was the first thing she did every morning of her life. Before she opened her eyes, before she rose, she listened. It was the deepest habit of her trade, and it had become the deepest habit of her person, so that she woke each day not into sight, but into sound, taking the temperature and the mood of the world by ear before she committed herself to it. This morning she heard the particular thick, muffled quiet that means frost or snow, the world gone padded and still, a cart somewhere on the far side of the quiet, close, its wheels ringing hard on frozen ruts, the horse's breath she could almost hear, a single blackbird, very clear in the cold, trying a phrase and abandoning it, and, from below, the small sounds of the music shop waking, old Mr. Pruitt riddling the stove, the clink of the shutter bar. She rose, at last, into air so cold it had frost ferns on the inside of the glass, and she washed in water with a skin of ice on it, and dressed, plainly and warmly, for the road, in the dark good clothes of a professional woman who went into other people's houses and must be neither shabby nor showy. And she put up her hair without much looking at it, for she had long ago stopped much caring how she looked, and she took up, from its place on the chest where it always stood, the leather roll that held her tuning lever. She unrolled it in the candlelight and looked at the tools, as she did every morning, not from need but from a kind of respect. The tuning lever first, the tool the trade sometimes called the hammer, though it struck nothing, a short steel lever with a socket at its head that fitted the square tuning pins, and a handle of close-grained boxwood, worn to the exact shape of her own hand by 20 years of holding, so that no other hand would ever fit it, and hers would fit no other. Then the mutes, the felt strips for silencing the strings she did not want to hear, and the rubber wedges, and the little Pabst mute on its wire handle for damping a single string between its neighbors. Then the tuning fork, steel, stamped A, that gave the one true note from which all the rest were reasoned out. That was the whole of it, a lever, some felts, a fork. With those 3 humble things, a tuner took an instrument of some 8,000 parts and 230 strings, pulling among them a total tension of some 18 tons, and made it, string by string, note by note, agree with itself. Frances rolled the tools again and tied the roll and set it in her bag, and drank a cup of tea standing at the frosted window, scraping a small clear circle in the frost fern with her nail to look out. The close lay white under the last of the moon, the great lawns furred with frost, the medieval houses dark around their edges, and above and beyond them all, pale and enormous and impossibly fine, the spire of the cathedral rose 400 feet into a sky just beginning to go from black to the deep blue of the coming day, the tallest spire in England, a single soaring line of gray stone that men had raised by faith and arithmetic and the labor of lifetimes 600 years before, and that stood there still in the frost, needing nothing, saying nothing, perfect. She looked at it a while. Then she finished her tea and took up her bag and went down the cold stairs to begin her winter rounds. She had looked at that spire every morning of her life, near enough, and it had come to mean, without her ever quite putting it into words, the very thing she demanded of herself and could not reach. It was perfect. That was the plain fact of it. 600 years it had stood, the single finest line of stone in England, tapering up and up to its impossible point without a fault, without a compromise, without one stone out of place, a thing men had made perfect, once, by faith and genius, and the labor of lifetimes, and that stood there still, needing nothing, changing nothing, saying nothing, perfect and cold and alone against the sky. She had wanted to be like that. She had wanted to make something perfect and be done, and she had never let herself see, in 20 years of looking at it in the frost, that the spire did not sing, that it stood perfect and silent and empty of music, that it was beautiful, precisely as the unplayed player in her was beautiful, and precisely as cold, and that all the actual music of the place happened not in the perfect spire, but below it, inside, in the imperfect breathing bodies of the choir and the great tempered organ, where nothing was perfect and everything sang. To understand Frances Hartley, standing in the frost with her tuning lever, you have to know that she had not meant to be a tuner at all. She had meant to be a player, and for a while it had seemed she would be. She was the daughter of a tuner, William Hartley, who tuned the pianos of Salisbury and its country houses for 40 years, a gentle, exact, patient man who could make any instrument speak, and had never in his life been able to make his own way in a conversation. And she had grown up among pianos, in the shop and the workroom, with the sound of tuning in her ears from infancy, the endless patient testing of interval against interval, the slow wavering beats, the notes struck and struck and struck. And she had shown, very early, a gift not for tuning but for playing, a real gift, an unusual one, the kind that made her father stand in the doorway of the workroom with a mute in his hand and simply listen, and made her mother weep quietly into the washing up, and made the organist of the cathedral, who heard her at 12, say the word conservatoire, and the word London. And once, greatly daring, the word career. She had gone to London at 17 on a scholarship and her father's savings and the organist's letters to study the piano seriously, to become a performer, and for 4 years she had worked as only the gifted and the frightened work, and she had been good, truly good, good enough to believe it might happen, good enough to be told by people who did not flatter that she had something. She had played in the students' concerts. She had begun at the very edge of things, to be spoken of, and then, in her 22nd year, 2 things had happened close together. Her father had fallen ill, a slow paralysis, a thing that took his hands first, the cruelest possible thing to take from a tuner, so that the man who had made all Salisbury's pianos speak could no longer hold a lever, and there was no money, and no other child, and her mother could not manage. And at almost the same time, and perhaps not unconnectedly, for she had gone home to nurse him, and had practiced badly and anxiously and too little. Frances had begun to fail, not dramatically. There had been no injury, no single catastrophe she could point to and grieve cleanly. There had only been a slow closing of the door, a competition not one that should have been, a teacher's growing coolness, an audition where her hands had gone cold and stupid with fear, and played a Frances who was not the real Frances, and then another, and then the slow, dreadful understanding, never spoken aloud by anyone, that the thing which had seemed about to happen was not, after all, going to happen, that she was very good, and that very good was not enough, that the world had room for perhaps 100 players, and she was, it turned out, the 101st. So she had come home. She had nursed her father until he died. She had taken up his rounds, for she knew the trade in her bones, having grown up in it, and a tuner's living was a living, and someone had to keep her mother, and she had become, over 20 years, the best tuner in the county, better than her father had been, sought after, respected, entirely reliable, and she had never played again. That was the thing. That was the wolf in her, though she did not yet have the word for it. She tuned pianos 6 days a week. She sat at some of the finest instruments in the west of England and made them perfect, string by string, and then she closed the lid and packed her tools and left, without ever once playing so much as a scale for pleasure. When customers asked her to play, and they did, charmed, not understanding, she said, pleasantly and finally, that she was a tuner, not a player, and changed the subject, and they learned not to ask again, because she could not bear it. That was the whole truth, folded down small. She could not bear to play imperfectly, as she would now play, out of practice, with a tuner's careful hands, and not a performer's free ones, could not bear to hear herself fall short of the player she had been going to be, and so she would not play at all. She had kept that one thing pure, untouched, unspoiled, the memory of the player she might have been, the perfect unplayed music, held in silence, safe, and to keep it pure, she had let all the rest go quiet. 20 years of silence, to protect one perfect thing that had never happened. There had been a young man, once, in London, in the good years, who had loved her, a violinist, gentle and clever, and not quite good enough either, and he had written to her for 2 years after she came home, kind, funny letters, full of the London she had left, and had asked her, twice, to marry him and make a life of music teaching somewhere. 2 imperfect players making an imperfect living, making imperfect music together, and she had said no, both times, and stopped answering, and let that go quiet too, because it was not the life she had been going to have, because it was second best, because it was tempered, and she would not be tempered. She would keep herself pure and unplayed and perfect and alone. He had married someone else, and by all accounts was happy, teaching violin in a northern town, spending his modest imperfect gift freely on a modest imperfect life. Frances did not let herself think of him often. When she did, it was with the particular cold ache of the road not taken, not because she had loved him past bearing, for she had not, quite, but because he had understood something she had not, and had spent his small gift and been glad, while she had saved hers and gone silent. He too, she supposed, was a thing she had left before the music. The work itself she loved and did beautifully, and it is worth understanding, because the understanding of it is the whole of what happened to her that winter. To tune a piano is not, as most people imagine, to make every note simply right. There is no simply right. That is the first and last secret of the trade, and it is stranger and deeper than any layman guesses. And Frances had known it in her hands for 20 years without ever letting it into the rest of her life. Here is the difficulty, and it is a real one, built into the nature of sound itself. If you tune the notes of a piano by pure intervals, if you make each fifth perfectly true, beatless, exactly in the ratio that the ear calls perfect, and you go up the keyboard fifth by pure fifth, 12 of them, all the way round the circle back to where you started, you do not arrive back where you started. You arrive a little sharp. The circle does not close. The arithmetic of the universe, for reasons no one chose and no one can alter, simply will not allow a keyboard to be perfectly in tune with itself in every key at once. Tune it pure in one key, and the far keys howl. Somewhere in the instrument, if every interval you have set is pure, there must be one interval left over that takes up all the accumulated error, and it is hideous, a savage out-of-tune wailing that the old tuners called the wolf, because it howled, and in the old days, in the old temperaments, they left it there, in the keys nobody played, and kept the common keys pure, and told the composers to stay away from the wolf. And then, over long years, the world had come to a different way, the way Francis tuned, the way nearly everyone tuned now, equal temperament. And equal temperament was this, that instead of keeping some intervals pure and letting one howl, you made every single interval very slightly impure. You narrowed every fifth by a hair, so little the untrained ear would never name it. You widened every third. You spread the unclosable error out, evenly, thinly, across all 12 notes, so that no interval was pure and no interval was foul, so that there was no wolf anywhere. And the price of banishing the wolf was that nothing, nowhere on the instrument, was perfectly in tune, ever again. Every chord you played was very slightly tempered, slightly compromised, slightly wrong, and because every chord was equally, evenly, gently wrong, the whole instrument could at last play in every key, could go anywhere, could modulate freely through all the keys of all the music ever written, and be, everywhere, sweet enough, true enough, whole. That was equal temperament. You gave up perfect purity anywhere in order to have workable sweetness everywhere. You tempered every interval a little so that no interval had to howl. You accepted a universal small imperfection as the price of a universal music. Her father had explained it to her when she was a child. In the workroom, in the plain, unhurried way he explained everything. And she had never forgotten his words, though she had never, until this winter, applied them to anything but pianos. "You can't have it both ways, Fanny," he had said, tapping a tuning fork on his knee. "That's the whole of it, and it's the hardest thing in the trade to make a customer believe. They want every chord perfect. They can't have it. Nobody can have it. It's not that we're not clever enough, it's that the world's not built that way. The numbers won't allow it. So you've a choice. You can have a few chords perfect and the rest hideous. That's the old way, and it drove the composers mad, penned them up in 3 or 4 keys. Or you can have every chord a little bit wrong and no chord hideous. That's our way, and it set the music free. And do you know what I think, tuning all day? I think a life's the same. You can keep a few things perfect and let the rest of you howl, or you can let everything be a little bit wrong and be whole. I know which I'd rather. I'd rather be tempered." She had been 12 and had thought it only talk. She thought of it now, 34 years later, in the cold, and understood that her gentle, inarticulate father had told her, once, the entire secret of how to live, and that she had spent 20 years doing the exact opposite. And Francis set the temperament by listening to the beats, for the impurity was audible if you knew how to hear it. 2 strings almost, but not quite in tune, set up a slow, wavering pulse, a wah, 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 as their sound waves moved in and out of step, and the closer to pure, the slower the beat, until at perfect purity, the beating stopped altogether, and the 2 notes lay down together in a stillness, and the tuner setting equal temperament did not tune to that stillness. That was the strange discipline of it. She tuned each interval to a particular rate of beating, this 5th beating slowly, that 3rd beating faster, a whole exact scheme of controlled, deliberate, listened-for impurity, laying in, by ear, across the middle octave of the piano, the precise pattern of small wrongnesses, that would let the whole instrument, when she was done, play anywhere, and sing everywhere, and never once howl. She could do it in her sleep. She set the temperament first, always, that delicate central octave, listening to the beats, tempering each interval by its exact small amount. And then from that tempered heart, she tuned outward, octave by octave, to the deep, booming basses and the bright wire trebles, and the whole instrument came into its tempered wholeness under her hands, and she closed the lid, and packed her tools, and went out into the frost to the next house, and never once, in 20 years, let herself notice that she had built her entire life on the opposite principle, that where the piano taught temper everything a little, she had tempered nothing, and kept one thing pure, and let the rest of her go silent as the wolf keys nobody dared to play. The first house of the round lay 4 miles out, at a village called Coombe Bisset, down the Blandford Road along the valley of the Ebble, and Frances went to it in the little governess cart she kept for the winter rounds, behind a stout, patient, unhurried cob named Barley, who knew the circuit as well as she did, and could very nearly have driven it himself. They went out through the town in the blue first light, the frost thick on every roof and rail, the shop shutters still up, the streets nearly empty, only a milk float and a policeman finishing his night, and a boy sweeping a step, who blew on his fingers and watched them pass. The cathedral bell struck the 3/4 as they crossed the bridge, and Frances looked back once at the spire, catching now the very first of the sun on its topmost point, a single spark of rose gold on all that gray, and then the road turned and the town was behind them, and there was the country, white and silent and enormous under the paling sky. It was the kind of morning that justified the whole hard business of the winter rounds. The frost had come down hard and clear in the night, and every blade of grass, every twig of every hedge, every dead umbel of cow parsley standing in the ditch was furred and jeweled with it, white and glittering, so that the bare January country, which could be so drab and brown and weeping, had been transformed overnight into something out of a fairy tale, a whole world dipped in sugar, sparkling faintly as the light grew. The Ebble ran black and quick between white banks. The water meadows lay silver, laced with their old drowning channels. Sheep stood in huddled gray clumps, breathing steam, and over it all, the sky went slowly from blue to gold to a pale, clear-washed winter blue, and the sun came up small and bright and without much warmth, and set the whole frosted valley blazing. Barley went at his own steady pace, his breath smoking, his hooves ringing on the frozen road, and Frances sat wrapped in a rug with the reins loose in her gloved hands, and let him take her, and listened to the ring of the hooves, and the small complaint of the cart's cold axles, and a robin somewhere, and the enormous frosty silence under all of it, and thought about nothing, which was the great gift of the winter rounds, the long, silent, frozen roads between the houses, the only time in her life she was neither working nor guarding herself, only carried. She passed a shepherd on the road, going up to his ewes with a bundle of hay on his back and a dog at his heel, and he touched his hat to her, and she to him, and neither spoke, for it was too cold and too early for speaking, and there was a whole companionship in the not speaking, 2 people abroad on a frozen morning, about their separate necessary work. She passed a cottage where a woman was hanging out frozen, washing that stood stiff as boards on the line, and a child at the gate who watched the cart go by, with round, solemn eyes, and lifted one small mittened hand. She passed the ford, frozen at its edges, where Barley picked his way delicately through the black running middle water, breaking the thin ice at the margins with a sound like breaking glass. And all the while the sun climbed, small and bright, and the frost blazed and glittered on every twig, and the great downs stood white to the north, and Frances went down the white valley behind her patient cob in the ringing cold, carried, unguarded, at peace, toward the first poor piano of the day. At Coombeset, she turned in at a small stone rectory behind a yew hedge, and a maid took Barley round to the stable, and Frances went in with her bag to tune the rector's piano, which she tuned twice a year, and which was a poor thing, an old cottage upright with a cracked soundboard and a tone like a tin tray, on which the rector's daughters practiced their hymns and their simple pieces with more goodwill than gift. She did not despise it. That was one of the things her father had taught her, the great lesson of the humble trade, that you gave a poor instrument in a cold rectory exactly the same care you gave a Broadwood grand in a great house, because the music that came out of it mattered exactly as much to the people who made it, and more, perhaps, for they had less. So she took off her gloves and warmed her hands at the little fire, and opened the poor old piano, and laid her felt mutes along the strings, and set her lever to the first pin, and began, in the cold, bright rectory parlor with the frost melting on the window, to set the temperament, listening, tempering, laying in the small exact wrongnesses that would let even this tin-trade old instrument, for another 6 months, play its hymns in every key and never howl. And while she worked, the rector's 2 daughters hovered in the doorway, watching, as children always did, half afraid of the strange upright woman with the steel tool who made the piano make its odd single wandering notes, and the elder, greatly daring, asked at last whether Frances would play them something when she had finished, for they had never heard the piano played by anyone who really knew how, only their own halting practicing. And Frances, tightening a pin, said, kindly, and finally, as she said in every house, that she was a tuner, not a player, and the child's face fell, and she went back to her sister, and Frances heard her whisper, "She never will," in the voice of a child reporting a known disappointment, and something in the plain, flat, childish accuracy of it. "She never will." And went into Frances and lodged there, and rode with her, unregarded, all the rest of that frosty day. The second house was larger and colder, a manor at Odstock, an old grey house in a hollow by the river, where the family were away, and the great rooms shut up under holland covers, and Frances was let in by a caretaker to tune the drawing-room grand against the family's return at Candlemas. The drawing-room was so cold that her breath smoked in it, and the keys were like ice under her fingers, and the great shrouded shapes of the covered furniture stood about in the dimness like sleeping animals, and the one uncovered thing, the piano, a fine Erard Grand, stood black and gleaming in the grey light from the tall shuttered windows, one shutter opened for her to work by. The caretaker lit no fire, it was not worth it, for one morning in a shut house, but brought her a stone hot water bottle to set on the piano stool and a cup of tea, and left her to it, and Frances worked in her coat with her breath smoking, and did not mind, for the cold did strange lovely things to the tone. A cold room is a bright room, acoustically. The chill tightens everything, the air, the strings, the great spruce soundboard, and the notes come out hard and clear and silvery and long, ringing on in the empty shrouded space, and Frances, striking her tempered intervals in that icy grandeur, listening to the slow beats waver and ring in the cold, found the work almost unbearably beautiful, as she sometimes did, in the way that only the maker of a thing can find the making of it beautiful, from the inside, where no audience ever comes. For that was the secret pleasure of her trade, the one she never spoke of, that a tuner hears the instrument as no player and no listener ever will. The player hears the music, the listener hears the music, but the tuner hears the and hears each single string alone, and each interval naked, and the whole slow architecture of the tuning going up under her hands, the temperament laid in note by note, the octaves stretched and trued, the beats slowing and quickening in their exact scheme, the entire hidden skeleton of sweetness on which all the future music would hang. She heard the piano thinking, she heard it become itself. And when at the end she ran, as a tuner must, a few chords across it to test the whole, never a piece, never music, only chords, only test. She heard, for a moment, in that cold shrouded room, the instrument sing out whole and tempered and true, ready for a music she would not stay to hear, and would not make herself, and she closed the lid on it, and felt, as she always felt, the small particular grief of the tuner, to make the thing perfect, and then to leave, before the music. She had wondered, sometimes, driving between the houses, whether every tuner felt it, that grief, or whether it was only her, whether the other men of the trade, the ones she met at the piano warehouse in town, packed their tools and drove away whistling, untroubled, glad of a job well done and paid for, or whether they too carried, under the ordinary satisfaction of the work, this small, persistent ache, this sense of always being the one who prepares, and never the one who arrives, always the servant of a joy they are gone before it comes. She thought perhaps they did not feel it as she did. She thought perhaps it was not the trade at all that ached in her, but her own particular wound, using the trade to speak, the whole of her life saying, through the closing of every piano lid in every cold house on every winter round, I make things ready for a music I will not let myself have. I tune and leave before the music. I have always left before the music. And she would gather her tools and go out to the frost and not let herself finish the thought. She packed her tools in the cold and warmed her hands a last time on the stone bottle, and went out through the shrouded shining house to the frost and the cart and the road, and turned Barley's head west, up the valley, toward the downs and the afternoon, and the next house, higher and lonelier, where an old lady lived who had been, once, long ago, something Francis had almost been. The road climbed as it went west, the valley narrowing, the frost thicker in the shadow of the northern down, where the sun never reached in January, and Francis, driving, let her mind run, as it did on the long empty stretches, over the strange fact of her trade, that she spent her whole life making instruments ready for a music she never heard. She tuned and left. The family came home to Oddstock at Candlemas, and someone sat down at the Erard she had trued in the cold, and played, Chopin perhaps, or a daughter's exercises, or a song round the fire at Christmas, and Frances was 4 parishes away by then, tuning another instrument for another music she would not hear, and the whole of her working life was that, the preparation, never the performance, the tuning, never the tune, the perfect readying of the thing, and then the leaving, always the leaving, before the first real note was played. She had thought of it, always, as simply the nature of the trade. She thought now, driving up the frozen valley, that she had made it the nature of her whole life, that she had readied everything and played nothing, tuned herself to a perfect pitch, and never once let herself sound. The afternoon house was at Broadchalk, and Miss Verano's piano was a beautiful old Viennese instrument, a Streicher, that had gone everywhere with her in her singing years, on which her accompanists had played in a dozen cities, and Frances tuned it once a year, in the winter, and it was the appointment on the whole round she most looked forward to, and most dreaded, both, because Miss Verano frightened her, and moved her, and saw straight through her, which no one else on the rounds troubled to do. "Ah," said the old lady, from her chair by the small fire, wrapped in shawls, her dark eyes still enormous and brilliant in her ancient face. "The tuner, the one who does not play," she said it every year. It was not cruel quite. It was more that she could not help noticing, being what she was. Come in, warm your hands. Prudence will bring tea, and then you will make my old friend sing, and I will listen, for it is the only singing left in this house now that I have none." Frances warmed her hands and drank the tea and opened the striker and began to work, and the old lady watched her with those brilliant, unnerving eyes, and after a while, as she always did, began to talk, of Vienna, of a conductor 50 years dead, of a night in Milan when the audience had stood on the seats, of the particular smell of a certain opera house, of things Frances could hardly believe she was hearing from a living mouth in a cold room in Wiltshire. "They ask me, the few who still come," Miss Verano went on, "whether I do not mind the smallness of it now. The 2 rooms, the 1 servant. After the palaces, they mean after the crowned heads and the suppers and the flowers thrown until you could not see the stage. And they cannot understand that I do not mind it in the least, and they go away thinking me either very brave or a little mad." She drew her shawls closer. "But you see, my dear, the smallness now does not touch the largeness then. The largeness happened. It is inside me, complete, and nothing that comes after can reach back and make it not have happened. I sang in Milan, and the people stood on the seats, and that is true forever, whatever cold room I die in. The only thing that could have spoiled it, the only thing, would have been not to have done it, to have stayed home, and kept the voice safe, and sung to no one, for fear it was not quite good enough. That would have been the tragedy, not this." She gestured at the small cold room, almost gaily. "This is nothing. This is only where an old woman keeps the memory of having spent herself entirely, and I would not exchange it for the largest warm room in England, kept by a woman who had saved her voice and never sung." Frances worked in silence, the beats wavering and slowing under her lever, and said nothing, because there was nothing she could say that would not give her away. "You wonder that I am not sad," said Miss Verano, watching her. "Living so, now, with all that behind me. Everyone wonders it. They think I must sit here, breaking my heart for Milan." She gave a small dry sound that in a younger woman would have been a laugh. "I do not. Shall I tell you why? Because I sang. You understand? I sang. It is done. It is behind me. It cannot be taken. I gave my voice while I had it, everywhere, to everyone. Not perfectly. I was never the greatest. There were 2 or 3, always better. But wholly, freely, all of it, every night, imperfect and entire. And now it is spent, and I am old, and I have no regret, because I spent it. I did not save it." Her eyes fixed on Frances, suddenly sharp. "It is the ones who saved it who break their hearts, child. The ones who kept the voice too pure to spend, who would not sing unless it could be perfect, and so, in the end, did not sing. Those are the ones who sit in cold rooms breaking their hearts, not I." Frances's hands had stopped on the lever. In the cold room, the last struck note rang on and slowly died. "I am a tuner," she said, at last quietly, the old answer, the closing answer, "not a player." "Yes," said Miss Verano, and her ancient face was not unkind, only terribly clear. "So you always say. And I have wondered, these several years, which it is with you, whether you never had the voice, or whether you had it and would not spend it." She turned her eyes to the fire. "But it is not my affair. Make my old friend sing, my dear. You do that beautifully, at least. You make everyone's instrument sing but your own." The last house on the winter round, on the evening of the second day, was the one Frances came to differently from all the others, not as a tuner to a customer, but as something more like a daughter or a pilgrim. It lay at the very head of the valley, under the down, at a hamlet so small it was hardly a place at all, a church and 3 cottages and a farm. And in the smallest and furthest of the cottages, alone but for a woman who came in daily, lived Silas Wren, who was 91 years old, and had been blind for 60 of those years, and had, before Frances was born, before her father was born into the trade, taught William Hartley the whole art of tuning, taken him as a boy and made him a master, so that everything Frances knew, every skill in her hands, came down to her from the old blind man in the cottage under the down, through her dead father, like a tune passed from voice to voice. She tuned his piano once a year, for nothing, in the winter, and she stayed the night, for it was too far to go back in the dark, and it was the one appointment on all her rounds that was not work but love. The road to it, that last stretch up under the down as the light went, was the loveliest and loneliest of the whole round, and Francis always drove it slowly to have it longer. The valley closed in, the down rose steep and white on the right, catching the last low red of the sun along its snow-streaked crest. The little frozen Ebble, no more than a brook here near its head, ran black and secret under fringes of ice, and the rooks went home over the bare beaches in long, straggling lines, calling, the loneliest and most companionable sound in the English winter dusk. There were no houses now, for a mile at a time. There was only the white down, and the darkening sky, and the ring of Barley's hooves, and the small red eye of the one lit window at the head of the valley, growing slowly nearer, and Frances driving toward it wrapped in her rug, with something in her chest that was almost, on that road, at that hour, going to the one soul who had known her since before she could remember, close to peace. She came to the cottage in the last of the light, the frost already hardening again as the sun went down behind the down, the one lit window golden in the blue dusk, and the woman who came in daily let her and Barley in, and saw to the horse, and had a good fire going and a meal ready, and there, in a chair beside the fire, small and white and still, with his blind eyes closed, and his enormous old ruined hands folded in his lap, sat Silas Wren, listening, as he always was, for he had nothing to do now with his 91 years, but listen, and he had grown so good at it that people said he could hear a person's whole heart in the way they crossed a room. "Francis," he said, before she had spoken, before the door was fairly shut, turning his blind face toward her with a smile that opened all the deep folds of it. "There you are, child. I heard the cart on the hill an hour since, and I have been listening for your step. Come in to the fire. You are cold, and you are tired, and there is something else. There is something in your step this year that was not there last year. Come and sit. We will see to the piano tomorrow, in the good light. Not that I need the light, but you do, and I'll not have you working by candle when you're weary. Tonight you'll sit and eat and tell an old man how the world goes, and let me listen to you, for I do nothing but listen now, and there's little enough worth hearing, and your voice I have heard since you were 3 days old, when your father brought you here in a basket, and it's music to me, child, whatever you say with it." And Frances Hartley, who guarded herself with everyone, who had closed the lid on herself 20 years before and left, sat down by the fire in the old blind man's cottage and let herself be listened to, and felt, for the first time in longer than she could remember, entirely seen, precisely by the one person in the world who could not see her at all. They ate, and the woman cleared the things and went home to her own cottage, and then it was just the two of them by the fire, the old blind man and the tuner, and the frost tightening outside, and the fire settling, and Silas Wren listened to Frances, and Frances, slowly, in the warmth and the dark, and the safety of those sightless kind attending eyes, began to talk as she had not talked in years. It was a strange thing, she had always found, to talk to Silas, and a freeing one, and she had never quite understood why until this night, when she understood it all at once, that because he could not see her, she did not have to arrange her face. All her life, with everyone, she had kept her face composed, kept the guard up, kept the pleasant, closed, professional expression that gave nothing away, and it took, she realized, a constant small effort, a tuning held taut every waking hour, that she had carried so long she no longer felt it, until, here, with the one person who could not see her, it was allowed at last to fall slack. And the relief of it, the relief of a face that need not be arranged, was so great it nearly undid her before she had said a word. She told him about the round, the poor rectory piano, the cold grand at Odstock, old Miss Verano at Broad Chalk, and the singing that was over. And Silas listened, his blind face turned to her, his ruined hands quiet, and now and then he said a word, and the word was always exactly the right one. For a man who has done nothing but listen for 60 years hears not only what is said, but the shape of the silence around it, the thing the words are walking carefully around. "This Miss Verano," he said at last, mildly, into a pause. "The singer, she troubled you. She sees too much. She said a thing to you. I hear it still going round in you, like a string that's been struck and won't damp. What did she say, child?" Francis was quiet a long moment, looking at the fire, which of course he could not see her do, and which somehow made it easier. "She said," Francis answered low, "that there are two kinds of people who end alone in cold rooms, those who never had the voice, and those who had it and would not spend it, because they could not spend it perfectly, and so saved it, and kept it pure, and never sang. She turned the words over, and she said she did not know which I was, whether I never had it, or whether I had it and would not spend it. And which are you?" said Silas Wren very gently. The fire ticked. Outside, an owl called from the down, and Francis, in the warm dark, to the old blind man who had known her since she was 3 days old, said the thing she had never said aloud to any living soul in 20 years. "I had it," she said. "I had the voice. I was going to be a player, Silas, a real one. You know I was. You heard me as a girl. You told my father. And then it did not happen. It closed. I was very good, and very good was not enough. And I came home, and took the rounds, and I have never played a note for myself since. 20 years. I tune the finest pianos in the county, and I close the lid, and I leave before the music. Every time, because I cannot bear to play now, as I would have to play now, out of practice, imperfect, falling short of what I was going to be. And so I have kept it. Don't you see? I have kept the player I was going to be safe and pure and perfect by never, ever playing, and letting all the rest go silent." Her voice broke, at last, after 20 years. She was right. The old woman was right. I am the second kind. I had the voice, and I would not spend it. I have kept one thing perfect by letting everything else go quiet as the grave. Silas Wren was silent for a while. His blind eyes turned to the fire he could not see, his old face full of a great and tender attention. "Ah, child," he said at last. "Ah, now I hear it. Now I hear what was in your step." He reached out one huge ruined old hand, and Francis took it, and it closed round hers, warm and dry and enormous. "You've tuned pianos 20 years, and you've never once heard what the tuning was trying to tell you. And it's been telling you, child, every day, under your very hands. Shall I tell you? Will you let a blind old man tell you the thing your own hands have known for 20 years, and never said to your head?" "Tell me," said Francis. "Not tonight." He pressed her hand and released it. "Some things must wait for the light, even for a blind man, especially for a blind man. For I've learned that the ear finds a truth better when the body's rested, and you're worn to the bone, child. I can hear it in every breath. A truth told to a tired heart runs off it like water off a frozen field. We'll wait for the morning. There's snow coming. I smell it. I've smelt weather 60 years, and never once been wrong. And it'll shut the road, and we'll have a whole quiet day, you and I, and the old piano, and I'll show you then, on the instrument itself, the thing you've known in your hands, and never in your head." He smiled, all the deep folds of his old face opening. "It's a good thing to be snowed in with an old man and a piano and a truth waiting. There's worse ways to spend a winter's day. Now away to your bed, child, before you fall asleep in that chair, and I've to listen to you crick your neck all night." He would not be moved from it, the waiting for the light, for Silas Wren had taught tuning for 70 years, and knew that a thing told too plainly is a thing not learned, that the ear must find it for itself, or it is never truly heard, and that a truth is best given to a rested heart, and worst to a weary one. And so Frances, worn out with the road and the cold and the long damned thing she had at last let out, went up the crooked cottage stair to the small room under the thatch, where a candle burned and a warming pan had taken the worst of the chill off the bed, and she undressed and lay down and blew out the candle, with the promise of the morning waiting for her like a wrapped gift on a shelf. And the snow came in the night. She half woke to it some hours later and lay listening, for she woke into sound always and heard that the world had changed. The frost's hard ringing brightness was gone, and in its place had come the huge, soft, thick, padded silence of falling snow, the most complete silence there is, a silence you can hear, the sound of 10,000 flakes settling on thatch and down and hedge and road, each one soundless, all of them together making a hush so deep it seemed to press gently on the ears. She got up and went to the little window under the thatch and looked out. The snow was falling straight down, thick and slow and steady, in the last of a westering moon that lit the whole falling curtain of its silver. And the down above the cottage, and the churchyard, and the 3 roofs of the hamlet were already smoothed and softened and made one under a deepening white, every hard edge gone, every dark thing gentled, the whole harsh frozen valley being quietly, patiently, remade in white while everyone slept. It was the most peaceful thing Frances had ever seen. There was no wind. The flakes came down as if they had all the time in the world, as if they had been falling since the beginning and would fall to the end, indifferent, unhurried, covering everything, asking nothing, and Frances stood at the little window in her nightgown with the cold coming off the glass, and watched the snow bury the world, and felt something in her, some hard, bright, frozen thing she had kept perfect and untouched for 20 years, begin, very quietly, under all that falling softness, to give. She went back to bed and lay listening to the silence of the snow, and did not sleep again for a long while, and did not mind, for the not sleeping was gentle now, not the old rigid watchfulness, but something softer, a lying awake in the great white hush, while the snow came down and covered the frozen valley and the frozen roads and the frozen 20 years, and made everything, for a night, one soft, unbroken white, in which no edge was too hard, and nothing howled, and even the wolf keys were buried and still. She thought, lying there, of all the pianos of her round, out there in the snow-covered dark, the rectory upright, the shrouded grand, the old singer's striker, each in its cold room, each tuned by her hands to that same tempered wholeness, each waiting under the snow for the music that would come. And she thought of the players who would come to them, the rector's plain daughters, thumping their hymns with more heart than skill, the family returning to Oddstock, a girl at the Erard picking out a song, old Miss Verano, who could no longer sing but still, Frances knew, sat some evenings and touched the keys of the striker and half sang, in a cracked whisper, the great parts she had sung in Milan, imperfect, ruined, and utterly unashamed, because she had spent her voice and had nothing left to guard. All of them making imperfect music on tempered instruments, freely, gladly, while Frances alone, who tuned them all, made none. She had thought that made her the pure one, the one who kept the standard, the one who would not stoop to imperfect music. She saw now, in the great white hush, that it made her only the silent one, that all the actual music in the whole of her round was made by people less gifted than she had been, who had simply been willing to sound, and that the rector's thumping daughters, tempered and imperfect and unafraid, were more truly musicians than she had been in 20 years, for they, at least, let the music through. In the morning, the snow had stopped, and lay a foot deep and unbroken over everything, blue shadowed in the hollows and blinding white where the low sun struck it, and the road was not to be dug that day. which meant Francis was snowed in at the cottage with the old blind man, with nowhere to go and nothing to do but the piano and the fire and the talk. And it was, she came to feel, the most necessary day of her life. She had woken, that first snowbound morning, into the strange, soft brilliance of it, and had lain a while listening to the changed world, the frost's hard ring all gone, and in its place the deep muffled hush of deep snow, and under that hush, faint from below, the small domestic sounds of the old man already up, the woman not come, and not coming through the blocked road, Silas managing for himself as the blind manage, by touch and habit and 60 years of knowing exactly where everything in his small world stood. She had come down to find him at the fire with the kettle already singing, having felt his way to it, and filled it, and hung it, unhurried, unbothered, a man for whom the dark held no terrors, because he had long ago made his peace with it, and learned its every corner. And she had thought, watching him, that here was a man who had lost the one thing she most feared to lose, not a career, but sight itself, the whole visible world, at 30, in a fortnight, and had not been destroyed by it, had made of the dark a home, and tuned in it, and taught in it, and learned, at last, to play in it. And that if he could make music in the actual dark, blind, for 60 years, then her own darkness, which was only the shadow of a dream, was a thing a person might surely learn to play in too. After breakfast, Silas asked her to bring him to the piano, an old square piano, small and sweet-toned, that stood against the inner wall, and she guided him to the stool, and he sat, and laid his enormous, ruined old hands on the keys, not playing, only resting them there, feeling the cold smoothness of the ivory, and he said, "I'll tell you now, the thing I would not tell you last night, and then you'll tell me if I'm right, for you've the ears to know. But first I'll tell you a thing about myself you don't know, that your father knew, and never told you, for I asked him not to while I lived, and he's gone now, so it falls to me." He was quiet a moment, his blind face toward the window and the snowlight. "I wanted to play too, child, same as you, when I was young, before the blindness, for I wasn't born blind. I lost my sight at 30, of a fever. I was going to be a player, and I was good, they said, as good as you, maybe better, and I worked, and it was all before me. And then the fever took my eyes, at 30, in a fortnight, and it was over, all of it, the playing, the career, the whole bright thing, gone into the dark, and me, a blind man of 30, with a trade to learn, or the workhouse to face." Francis sat very still. "And I'll tell you what I did," said Silas, "for it's the same thing you've done, and I did it for 30 years, so I know it from the inside as few can. I would not play. I learned to tune. I'd a fine ear, it was all I had left, and I tuned, and I became a master of it, and I taught it, your father among 100 others, and I made my living and more, but I would not play. For 30 years, because I could not play as I was going to play, with sight, with freedom, the player I was going to be, and I could not bear to hear myself fall short of him, and so I kept him pure, the sighted player I never got to be, by never playing at all in the dark. 30 years of silence, child, to keep one perfect thing that never happened. You see, you're not the first to catch this particular wolf. I had it 30 years before you were born." "What?" Francis's voice was not steady. "What changed it? What made you play again?" Silas Wren smiled, his blind face lifting. "Your father," he said, "William, a boy of 15, my apprentice, cheeky as a sparrow. He'd heard, somehow, that I'd been going to be a player, and one day, tuning beside me, bold as brass, he said, 'Master, why don't you never play? You tune the finest pianos in Wiltshire, and you never play a note. Are you afraid?' And I near struck him, and then I heard the truth of it in a boy's rude question. 'Are you afraid?' And I was. That was the whole of it. 30 years of high tragic silence, and underneath it, just a frightened man, afraid to fall short of a dream. He laid his hands on the keys. So that night, when the boy had gone home, I sat down alone at my own piano in the dark. For it's always dark for me, child. There's no waiting for a good light, and I played. Badly. Oh, badly. 30 years unpracticed and blind, feeling for every note. It was pitiful. If there'd been an ear in the world to hear it, I'd have died of the shame. But there wasn't. There was only me and the dark and the wrong notes. And somewhere in the middle of that pitiful stumbling, I stopped hearing how bad it was and started hearing that it was music. My own, imperfect, blind, 30 years too late, but music, coming out of me at last, instead of dying in me. And I wept like a child over the keys, and I have played every day of my life since, 60 years, and never once well, and it has been the joy and the saving of me. He turned his blind face to her. The perfect sighted player I was going to be, never played a note, child, for he never existed. He was a dream, and dreams don't play. Only I played, blind, clumsy, imperfect, real. And I would not trade 1 hour of my bad real playing for a lifetime of that dream's perfect silence. So I'll ask you what your father asked me, child, and I've the right, for I taught him to ask it. You tune the finest pianos in the county, and you never play a note. Are you afraid? Yes, said Frances Hartley. Yes, I am afraid. It came out of her in the snow-lit room, plain and bare, 20 years of high, careful silence collapsing into 3 small, true words, and having said them, she found there was more, and let it come. I am afraid to play as I would play now, badly, stiffly, out of practice, a tuner's hands and not a player's, and hear how far I have fallen from what I was going to be. I have kept her perfect by never letting her be tested, the player I was going to be. And I see now that she is not perfect, she is only unplayed, and there is a difference, and I have wasted 20 years on it, and I do not know how to stop, Silas. I have forgotten how to stop. I have forgotten how to simply play. Then I'll teach you, said Silas Wren, the same as I teach the tuning, for it's the very same lesson, and you've had it in your hands 20 years. Come, sit beside me, put your hands on the keys. And Frances rose and came, and sat beside the old blind man on the piano stool, and put her hands, trembling a little, on the cold ivory of the old square piano. Now, said Silas, you set the temperament every day of your life. Tell me what it is. In plain words, what do you do when you set the temperament? I make every interval slightly impure, said Frances slowly, so that no interval howls, and the whole can play in every key. You temper everything a little, so nothing has to be pure, and nothing has to howl, and the whole instrument can sing. And what would happen if you would not do it, if you insisted every interval be pure? Then the circle would not close, and one interval would take up all the error, and it would howl. The wolf, said Silas softly. And that, child, is your life. That is exactly your life, and it's been under your hands the whole time. You would not temper. You would not make the small imperfection everywhere. You insisted one thing, the player you were going to be kept perfectly pure, untouched, untempered. And so all the error of your life had to go somewhere, and it went into one great howling silence, 20 years long. The wolf, the unplayable ruined interval, where your music should have been. You kept one thing pure and let it howl through the whole of the rest of you. His ruined hand found her wrist, gently. The piano knows better. The piano has known better for 200 years. Temper everything, child. Give up the pure, perfect, unplayed player. Let her go a little out of tune, like every interval on this keyboard, like every good thing that actually gets to sound. Play badly, play stiffly, play out of practice, imperfect, a tuner's hands. Temper the dream a little, Let it be slightly wrong, like a tempered fifth, and the whole of you can sing at last, in every key, and there'll be no wolf anywhere." He was quiet a moment, and then, more softly still, "You've spent 20 years, child, protecting a note you never played, and a note never played is not a pure note. It's not a note at all. It's a silence. You've been guarding a silence and calling it perfection. But the only perfect music is the music that never sounds, and the only perfect love is the love never spent, and the only perfect life is the one never lived. And none of them are perfect at all, child. They're only empty. The perfection is a trick the fear plays, to keep you from the risk of the real. The real is always a little out of tune. That's how you know it's real. That's how you know it's sounding. Temper it and let it sound." Frances sat with her hands on the keys and the tears running down her face in the snowlight. "Play," said Silas Wren, very gently. "Anything, badly. Now, while there's snow on the road and no one in the world to hear but a blind old man who loves you and cannot see you fall short of anything. Play, child. Spend it. Don't save it. Temper it and spend it and let it sing." And Frances Hartley, 46 years old, snowed in at the head of a white valley, in a cottage under the down, beside the blind master who had taught her father the trade, lifted her tempered, imperfect, out-of-practice hands, and, after 20 years of silence, began, very quietly, very badly, to play. She played for an hour that snow-lit morning, and it was not good, and it did not matter, and somewhere in the middle of it stopped being bad and started being only music, imperfect and entire, tempered and whole, filling the small cottage room and going out muffled into the deep snow. And the old blind man sat beside her with his ruined hands quiet in his lap and his blind face lifted, and the tears standing in his sightless eyes, listening as he had listened to everything for 60 years, to the one thing he had most wanted to hear, his dead pupil's daughter, unlocked at last, spending the voice she had saved too long. But that is Frances's story, the playing of it, the long, slow return of it, over the months and years that followed. And it is not, quite, for tonight. For tonight is about sleep, and the playing had opened something in her that had been shut and braced for 20 years. And when a thing so long held finally opens, the body, at last, may rest. That night, for the snow held her a second night at the cottage, the road still deep, Frances went up to the little room under the thatch, and undressed, and lay down, and the tiredness that came over her was not the old grinding sleeplessness, but something entirely new, a vast and welcome heaviness, the tiredness of a thing at last set down. And sleep came. It did not ask permission. It came the way the snow had come in the night before, not suddenly, not with any edge, but as a slow, soft, thick, descending silence, settling over everything, flake on soundless flake, gentling every hard edge, softening every dark shape, covering the whole frozen landscape of her, filling in the hollows, burying the wolf, making all one soft, unbroken white in which nothing was too sharp and nothing howled. It began in her hands, those tuner's hands, those player's hands that had held the lever 20 years and had at last, that morning, spent themselves on music. They lay open and warm on the coverlet, and the long ache of the day and the deeper ache of the 20 years went out of them, finger by finger, and they grew heavy and still. Her breathing lengthened and slowed and dropped like a tuning going down into the deep bass octaves, into something long and low and even. And as it dropped, she became aware, drowsily, from the edge of sleep, that for the first time in as long as she could remember, there was no beat in her. That was the only way she could name it, half asleep, in the language of her trade. All her life, under everything, there had been a beat, that slow, relentless, wavering pulse of two things, almost, but not quite in tune, the dream and the life, the player she was and the player she meant to be, sounding together and never quite agreeing. Wah, wah, wah. A small ceaseless dissonance she had carried so long, she had stopped hearing it as anything but the sound of being herself. And now it had stopped. She had tempered the two of them. She had let the dream go a little out of tune, down to meet the life, and the life come a little up to meet the dream. And somewhere that day, over the keys, in the snowlight, they had come into a tempered agreement, and the beat had slowed, and stilled, and there was, in the middle of her, for the first time in 20 years, no wavering at all, only a single low sustained note, warm and even and whole, the note of a woman at last, in tune with her own life, sounding quietly on toward sleep. The snow silence held the cottage. She listened to it, half under already, the huge, soft nothing of snow-covered country, no wind, no cart, no ringing frost, only the deep white hush pressing gently on the ears, the most peaceful sound there is, which is very nearly no sound at all. Somewhere below the fire settled, the old blind man slept or listened in his room. The snow lay a foot deep and unbroken over the down and the churchyard and the road and the frozen valley and the frozen 20 years, and covered them, and gentled them, and made them one. Temper everything a little, she thought, from a long way down, drowsy and warm. So nothing has to howl. And the thought did not need finishing. She had tempered the dream at last. She had let the pure, perfect, unplayed player go a little out of tune, like a tempered fifth, like every good thing that actually gets to sound, and the wolf was gone. The great howling silence was gone, buried under the soft descending snow of sleep, and the whole of her could sing at last, in every key. Images drifted down through her soft and unhurried as the snow, a spire catching the first rose-gold spark of the sun, a frosted valley blazing silver, a shrouded grand ringing on and on in a cold room, an old singer's brilliant dark eyes by a small fire, a blind man's ruined hands resting on cold ivory, her own hands, at last, moving on the keys, badly, freely, spending it. There was one last small stirring of the old rigidity, the 20-year habit, the guard at the lid, reaching in sleep to close the piano and pack the tools and leave before the music. And it rose and reached, and then, from a long way down, remembered the snow and the tempering, and let the lid stand open, and let the music go on, and eased and softened, and sank into the deep white hush, and did not come up again. On the second snowbound night at the head of a white Wiltshire valley, in a small room under the thatch, with the snow lying deep and unbroken over all the frozen world, and her long silence at last tempered and spent, Frances Hartley, piano tuner, who had kept one thing perfect by letting all the rest go quiet, fell asleep in the great soft hush, with the music still sounding in her. She slept. The night lay over the snowbound valley, as nights do, and everything slept. The snow had stopped, and the sky had cleared, and over the white down the stars came out hard and thick and brilliant in the great cold, wheeling slowly above the buried valley. And the moon, rising late, laid a blue radiance over the unbroken snow, so that the whole head of the valley lay glimmering and silver and utterly still. The down, the churchyard, the three roofs, the one thin thread of the buried road, all softened into one gentle whiteness, all edges gone, all harshness covered, the wolf keys of the whole harsh frozen world buried deep and silent under the mercy of the snow. In the cottage under the down, the fire sank to a red glow, and the old blind man slept in his chair or his bed, 91 years old, his ruined hands quiet, his long silence and its long ending, both behind him now, at peace. And in the little room under the thatch, the tuner slept, deeper than she had slept in 20 years, the lid at last left open, the music still faintly sounding somewhere under her sleep. Far down the valley, and far beyond it, the other pianos of the winter round stood silent in their cold rooms in the snowbound night. the poor old upright in the rectory at Coombe Bisset, the shrouded grand at Odstock, old Miss Verano's striker at Broad Chalk, all of them tuned, or waiting to be tuned, all of them tempered, or waiting for the tempering, each one an instrument in which no interval was pure and no interval howled, each one made ready, by the small, even necessary imperfection laid patiently into its heart, to play, when its hour came, in every key, and sing. And in one of those cold rooms an old singer lay awake, perhaps, with her brilliant dark eyes open in the dark, remembering Milan, at peace, because she had spent her voice and not saved it, and the thought of her, though Francis slept too deep now to think it, lay somewhere in the night like a tempered chord, sad and sweet and whole. The great world turned over toward morning, under its snow, indifferent, unhurried, as it had turned for 10,000 winters, and would turn for 10,000 more, covering and uncovering the valleys, freezing and thawing the roads, taking no notice at all of one tuner asleep at the head of one white valley, with her long silence at last tempered and spent, and yet it was the world's very indifference, its great slow patient covering snow, that had gentled the hard frozen 20 years and let her sleep so deep. For the snow does not choose what it covers, and buries the wolf and the pure note alike, and asks nothing, and gentles everything, and that is its mercy, and it fell on the just and the unjust, and the tuned and the untuned, all the same, all that silent night, over all the white valley, and was kind. And it seemed to Francis, sleeping, or to some listening part of her that never fully slept, that the snow itself was a kind of tempering laid over the whole hard world, that just as she softened every interval a little, so that none should howl, the snow softened every edge of the frozen valley a little, filled in every harsh hollow, gentled every black stark thing, spread its even white forgiveness over the churchyard and the road and the down and the wolf keys of the whole cold earth, so that for one night nothing was too sharp and nothing was too pure and nothing howled, and the whole buried world lay tempered and at peace under the falling mercy of it, waiting, like a tuned instrument, for the music of the morning. The hour that had so often found Francis rigid and awake, the small hour, the guarding hour, the hour at the closed lid, came, in its time, over the little room under the thatch, and found the lid open, and the music sounding, and the wolf buried under the snow, and found nothing to wake, and went on. She slept through it. There was no more silence to keep. Toward morning the eastern sky beyond the down began to pale, from starlit dark to a cold clean gray, to the first faint rose of a winter dawn coming up over a world made all of snow, and a robin woke somewhere in the buried churchyard, and tried, in the great cold, a single clear phrase, and this time did not abandon it, but sang it whole. Francis woke a little after 8, into a room full of the strange, bright underwater light that only comes on the morning after snow, the light thrown up from the white ground onto the ceiling, moving faintly, and into a silence so deep and so soft that for a moment she thought she had gone, in the night, somewhere out of the world. For a moment she did not know where she was in time, not the year, not the 20 years, not the closed lid, and it was the most extraordinary sensation of her life, simply a rested woman, in a warm bed, in a small bright room, with snow light on the ceiling, and a robin singing, and somewhere under everything, still faintly sounding, music. And then she remembered, all of it, the snow, the old blind man, her own hands moving on the keys at last, and it did not close the lid on her. It opened in her, warm and whole, like a tempered chord, like a valley full of light. She rose and went to the little window and looked out at the morning. She stood there a while and let herself feel the whole of what had changed. It was not that the old grief was gone. It would never be quite gone. The player she had been going to be was still a loss, and would always be a loss, and there would be mornings, she knew, when the loss would find her again. But it had been tempered. That was the difference, and it was the whole difference, It no longer howled alone in a locked key, while the rest of her went silent to keep it pure. It had been let down, gently, a little out of tune, to live among all the other small, imperfect, real things of an actual life, the poor pianos, and the cold roads, and the childish disappointment in a rectory doorway, and the modest, imperfect music she would now, at last, allow herself to make, and being tempered, being spread thin and even, and shared among the whole of her, it had stopped being a wolf, and become only one small sadness among many, bearable, carryable, part of the whole tempered chord of a life that could, imperfect and entire, at last, in every key, begin again to sound. The snow-bound valley lay under a clean, pale winter sun, blinding white and blue-shadowed, utterly silent, utterly still, the down rising unbroken and dazzling behind the cottage, the churchyard, a soft white field, with the black church rising out of it, the three roofs deep in snow, with thin blue threads of smoke going straight up into the windless, brilliant air. Nothing moved but the smoke and one robin, and once a hare, that came out of the churchyard and crossed the white field in a series of long, easy bounds, and vanished into the hedge, leaving a line of prints, the only mark on all that white. The road was still deep and unbroken. She was snowed in another day at least, and she found she was glad of it. She dressed and went down, and there by the fire sat Silas Wren, awake, his blind face turned to the window and its snowlight, his ruined hands folded, smiling, having heard her step on the stair. "You slept," he said. "It was not a question. I heard it in your step just now coming down. There's a weight off it that's been on it 20 years. You slept, child, right through, deep as the snow." He held out one huge old hand, and she came and took it. "And you played, yesterday. You'll not stop now. You'll play badly a long while yet, and then less badly, and it'll never be the pure, perfect thing you saved so long. That's gone, child. That was always only a dream, and dreams don't play, only living hands play, tempered and imperfect and real. But you'll make music. You'll spend it now, not save it. And when you're my age, snowed in somewhere at the head of some valley, you'll not sit breaking your heart for the player you never let yourself be. You'll sit at peace, like your Miss Verano, because you spent it." He pressed her hand. "That's all any of us gets, and it's enough, and it's everything. To temper the dream, and spend the voice, and let the whole of you sing in every key, even out of tune, even late, even here. Now, there's a fine light, you tell me, on the snow, and the road's shut, and we've a whole day and nowhere to go, and an old square piano against the wall." His blind face lifted, full of a great sweet mischief. "Play for me, child. We've the time. Play me something, badly, all day if you like. There's no one on earth to hear but the snow, and a blind old man, and neither of us minds a wrong note, and both of us have waited a very long time." And Frances Hartley crossed the small, bright, snowlit room, and sat down at the old square piano, and lifted her tempered, imperfect, unsaved hands, and, while the snow lay deep and gentle over all the white valley, and the robins sang in the buried churchyard, and the blind old master listened with the tears bright in his sightless eyes, she played, not perfectly, never again perfectly, but wholly, freely, imperfect, and entire, spending at last the long-saved voice, letting the whole of her sing, in every key, with no wolf anywhere, into the great kind covering silence of the snow.